Every record of that night is gone, erased, burned, or simply missing from archives that should still hold them. Decades later, when investigators finally reopened the case, they found something impossible. The paperwork existed. It was cited in other documents, referenced in official memos, listed in filing indexes, but the files themselves had vanished without a trace. Somebody didn't lose this evidence. Somebody buried it. Picture an ordinary evening, until it wasn't. Within hours, dozens of witnesses reported something they could not explain. Lights where should have been darkness, silence where there should have been sound, and then nothing. No survivor gave a clear account. No two stories matched, and the officials responsible for uncovering the truth were reassigned, silenced, or quietly erased from the public record themselves. For over a century, historians have tried to rebuild what happened from fragments: a torn ledger page, a half-burned letter, a photograph that, according to the archive itself, was never taken. Every fragment raises more questions than it answers. Every lead ends at a locked door, a redacted line, a name scratched out so violently it tore through the paper beneath it. This is not a story with a tidy ending. This is a story that still terrifies the very people trained to explain it. And by the end of this video, you will understand exactly why. To understand the horror, you have to understand the world it happened in. A world where power answered to no one, where institutions guarded secrets like scripture, and a single signature could make a person disappear. The event unfolded in a place built on isolation, a remote settlement far from any city large enough to ask questions. Those who lived there depended entirely on the authority that governed them, for food, for shelter, for permission to leave. It was the perfect setting for something forbidden to take root, because there was no one left outside to notice if it did. The officials in charge answered to a higher, unnamed authority, one that communicated through sealed letters and unsigned orders, demanding results without ever explaining what those results were for. Workers whispered about restricted areas, locked buildings, night shifts. The day shift was never permitted to discuss. Then came the reports. Strange sounds after dark. People who left for their shift and were never seen returning to their quarters. A ledger, later recovered, showing supply requests that made no logical sense. Materials with no known use, ordered in quantities no ordinary operation could justify. And then, buried in a single surviving memo, dated just weeks before everything changed, a warning. Someone inside had tried to expose what was happening. Their name was never recorded again in any surviving document. They had vanished before they could finish the sentence. No further correspondence from that person exists anywhere in the archive. Not a resignation letter, not a transfer order, not even a footnote explaining where they went. It is as if the institution itself reached out and closed a hand around them. Here is what the surviving evidence, pieced together from testimony, recovered fragments, and records that survived the purge, actually tells us. What began as a contained, controlled operation spiraled into something its own architects could no longer manage. Internal correspondence hints at a decision made under pressure, a mistake concealed rather than corrected, and a chain of command more concerned with protecting its reputation than protecting the people beneath it. Every choice made in secrecy compounded the one before it until the truth became too dangerous to ever let surface. Witnesses who came forward decades later, elderly by then, speaking for the first time, described a night of chaos. Screaming, orders shouted in the dark, people running toward buildings they had been forbidden to enter their entire lives, only to find them already empty. Not abandoned, emptied, deliberately and without explanation. And here is the detail that redefines everything historians thought they knew. The official death toll recorded at the time does not match the number of names later found scratched into a wall in one of the sealed structures, a wall discovered nearly 70 years afterward, hidden behind a collapsed section of plaster. Dozens more names. People the official record insists never existed at all? Who erased them? Who decided their lives were inconvenient enough to strike from history entirely? The paperwork trail, wherever it still exists, was signed only with initials, never a full name, never a title, never anything that could be traced back to a living, accountable human being. Somebody built this silence on purpose, and it worked. For almost a century, forensic researchers who later examined the wall said the names weren't carved quickly, in panic, in a single desperate night. They were carved carefully, over time, as though someone trapped inside that structure knew exactly what was coming and wanted to make absolutely certain that someone, someday, would find them. When fragments of the truth finally surfaced, the response was almost as chilling as the original event. No sweeping trial, no public reckoning. A handful of low-level clerks were quietly dismissed, their names attached to blame that was never truly theirs to carry, while the individuals who gave the original orders were never identified, protected by decades of missing paperwork and the slow, convenient deaths of anyone who might have testified. The families of the vanished received no formal apology. Many never received confirmation that their relatives had died at all. Only silence, then more silence, until entire branches of family history simply ended in a gap no one could explain. But the story didn't stay buried forever. Independent researchers, archivists, and descendants of witnesses spent decades cross-referencing fragments no official body would touch. Their work is the only reason we know as much as we do today, and the only reason this video exists. Why does this still matter now? Because the same conditions that allowed this horror to happen, unchecked authority, manufactured secrecy, institutions more loyal to their own image than to the people they claim to serve, have never fully disappeared. They simply changed shape. Every generation convinces itself it's too informed, too connected, too modern for this kind of silence to happen again. History disagrees. The truth of what happened that night was never fully recovered. What we have is a skeleton of the story, assembled from what its architects failed to destroy completely. And that may be the most unsettling detail of all. Somewhere, in an archive no one has opened in decades, the rest of it may still be waiting. Every buried truth leaves a scar somewhere, in a wall, in a ledger, in a family that never got its answers. This story isn't really about one night or one secret. It's about how easily silence spreads when power decides a truth is inconvenient, and how long that silence survives if no one ever asks again. History doesn't forget. It waits for someone curious enough to pull the thread, patient enough to follow it into the dark, and brave enough to say the names that were supposed to disappear forever. So here's the question this leaves you with. How many more silences like this one are still sitting, unopened, in an archive somewhere, right now? Power protects itself first, and its people second. A pattern older than any single archive. One that keeps repeating until enough people refuse to look away. Curiosity is not disrespect to the dead. It is the only thing that gives them back their names. If this story unsettled you the way it unsettled us, tell us what you think really happened down in the comments. And if you want more forbidden history dragged into the light, you already know what to do next.